questions, but might get the easy ones.
Welcome everybody to our presentation tonight on steps to successful business strategies. I'm going to do a little bit of a brief introduction to myself, and then Agnes is going to talk a little bit about herself, and then Stephen is going to do an introduction for him as well. Just a little bit of background. This is the second in a series of seminars that we're running together, and the first seminar was really around organisational culture and some of the legal strategies and legal implications. And this is the second one where we're really looking at part of this is about sort of motivation and inspiration to looking at different strategies during a challenging period. So nobody would argue that this isn't a downturn market at the moment. Everybody's seeing it, everybody's feeling it. You certainly read a lot about it. But what we'd like you to walk away with tonight is maybe a couple of different thoughts and ideas about things that businesses can do that are actually positive. So I think there's a lot of opportunity out there. It's just that sometimes when we read the negative stories in the media, it's very easy to not see some of the possibilities that are out there. I'd also probably like to just say that if you walk away with maybe 2 or 3 ideas from some of the stuff I talk about tonight, that'd be fantastic. If you walk away with 2 or 3 ideas or tips from Agnes and Stephen, then hopefully that's a really good takeaway for you. There should be some really good stuff that we get out of that, and you get out of tonight. A little bit about my background. I think there's a photo. There we go. My background is in organisational psychology, and I've been running ODG Solutions for 7 years in April. And I started my business in, I guess, what you would call the post-GFC period. And there was certainly a lot of people at the time who said, why would you start a business like yours in the GFC? It doesn't make any sense. You're really going to struggle. And 7 years later, we're still around, and we operate in Perth. We've got a new client in New Zealand. I'm off to KL next week because we're doing some work over there as well. And part of that I'll talk a little bit about later, which is part of looking outside the square in terms of business strategy. Our specialty is really around culture change. We do a lot of work in the areas of leadership and strategy. I also sit on a number of boards, and I guess what's really quite important to me is helping out in the not-for-profit sector, particularly out in the mental health space, which is something that's quite pertinent and dear to me. And I'll hand over to Stephen and Agnes to do a couple of intros as well. So we have Stephen first.
Thanks for coming tonight. So I'm one of the directors here at Lynn & Brown Lawyers. My area is commercial law. I've been practicing for 20 years. We've started this series with Mark, and as Mark said, this is the second of the 3 parts of the series. And I think tonight you're going to see Mark talk about a few different ways to operate a business in the economic climate we face ourselves in now, and that I suppose the positive opportunities that are available to you, and we're going to comment, myself and Agnes, on different legal aspects of that, and so that as you look at that development and finding the opportunities are there, make sure that you get it legally right, not just for how you're going to sit yourself today, but how you're going to sit yourself in the future going forward. And Agnes.
Yeah.
All right. I mainly specialise at the moment in workplace relations and health and safety law. I've been in that space for the last 3 years. I started off my legal career in commercial, so it's been great because while you're dealing with workplace relations, you really do need to understand from the employer perspective and some of the issues they might have, including intellectual property issues, executive managers, all that kind of thing. So it's great to have a bit of a broader view rather than a single focus. All the info's there. I'm a Kiwi, very proud of it. And so thanks very much for coming, and we look forward to it.
Thank you, Agnes. This is fairly informal. Obviously, we're sitting down at the front here, so I mean, if you actually want to jump in and ask some questions throughout the presentation, feel free to do so, because I'll be presenting a little bit of content and then handing over to Agnes and Stephen, so it's almost a little bit interview-like. But if you feel like there's a question that you'd like to ask along the way, feel free to do so. That's part of the informal format. I guess as I move into the first piece, what I'd like to say is that some of what we're talking about tonight is not necessarily going to be anything new, and it's not necessarily going to be a silver bullet for you either. So what I'd probably suggest is that there might be some things that we're going to talk about that are ideas that you might not be thinking about currently, maybe if the business that you're in is going through a bit of a challenging period, you might have forgotten some of these strategies. But at the same time, there might just sort of be renewed focus on opportunities. So as I said earlier, I mean, if you take a few tips away from what I'm talking about and a few tips away from the lawyers over here, hopefully you can get something really valuable out of this session. This is a little model that I put together. So this is not out of literature. Nothing is out of the literature tonight. This is partly around some of the work that we do, but also, I guess, a lot of the work that we do around strategy and culture, we sort of draw upon, current research and media. And so what I want to talk a little bit about in the first piece is around aggressive growth strategies. And I've invited Ryan here along tonight, and Ryan comes from Coffee, and we've actually done quite a lot of work together. And I guess part of the philosophy that we've worked on in his organisation is around aggressive strategies, particularly around focusing on marketing, business development, sales, and culture. But one of the other areas that I think is quite useful is understanding the status of your current competition. What I'd like to offer when I talk about this is probably some advice, and that's not to become obsessed with your competition. It's not actually healthy for an organisation to become overly obsessed with competition. Now, the reason I say that is because the more you obsess over your competition, the less you're probably focusing on your own game, right? But it's good to sometimes be mindful around your competition. And one of the things that, I was reading a piece the other day, and I was saying, there's an opportunity sometimes to understand that maybe some of your competitors out there in the market are also struggling, and they will have clients that are, are willing to move at the moment, and it could just be a really, opportunistic period to actually seek them out. The other thing that I was going to say around the competition is the opportunity to develop a mindset where, and we talked about this a little bit earlier before the presentation tonight, that a lot of your competitors at the moment are bunkering down, right? They're slashing costs, they're slashing staff, and they're not investing in things like sales and business development. When you actually go, and particularly into medium, large organisations, when they start slashing costs during a tough period, they often go sales, marketing, HR, training, procurement. I mean, the obvious ones tend to go first. So you can always make the assumption that your competitors out there in the market are actually slashing costs. So it's a great opportunity to start looking at how you can go about growth. The second point is around strategic proactivity in business organisation. And there was a couple of things that actually what I was reading about when I was putting this presentation together. And one was the importance of actually maintaining a balanced perspective, particularly when you read something really negative in the media. Now, over the last few years, one of the things that I've seen is that every now and again there's a major shift in the oil and gas prices, or the iron ore prices, and you sort of see in Perth in particular a bit of a drop. You just sort of see this natural sort of fluctuation that tends to happen. And some businesses get really reactive. Now, the opportunity for your business is that when you see things happening, particularly out there in the marketplace, is that you don't buy into that reactivity, and you sort of take a step back and go, okay, well, if we were going to look at this from an optimistic perspective, what would we go after? And the other part of that is then also thinking about how do we actually stabilise our business to make sure that whatever decision that we actually do make is the right decision. I've talked a little bit about this already because it's something that I guess is really important to us. The investment in sales, marketing, business development, and culture. Now, I guess the first grouping of sales, marketing, and business development is often where businesses just stop spending. And when you think about it, it defies a bit of logic, because when we're looking at a downturn period, I mean, what do you want to do? You want to actually create more sales as a business. You certainly don't want to be losing sales. So if businesses stop spending money on things like marketing and business development effort, then you're sort of going to get what you'd expect, which is a reduction unless your clients come through. The other thing is culture. I mean, it's obviously something that's really important to us because we run a lot of initiatives around organisational culture development and change. A lot of businesses forget that the culture of their organisation is absolutely critical in getting through a downturn period. And they're the people in your organisation that's still going to be there eventually when there is an upswing as well. So if you treat people really well and you've developed the right sort of atmosphere amongst your workforce, you can ride out the downturn period quite well. When there's an upswing, you'll do really well out of that. Which leads to talent management, and this is an absolute critical one. And I know that there are people in the room that are dealing with this at the moment. This is a really, really touchy, sensitive subject because you've got a business where you've got a workforce of people, and some of those people have been there for a while, and you want to keep your talent. But in a challenging period, sometimes you actually have to reassess whether the service offerings that you've got are relevant in the current market. And if you deem that they're actually not, or that you've got to diversify a little bit, sometimes that means that there's some restructure work that you have to do as well, which means that some of the people in the business might not be the right people anymore. So what do you do about those? And then the other part to that is then we're looking at what do you require in the future. And I mean, I know that in the room, we're looking at historically somebody that might be a senior engineering manager that you're hiring, but now we're looking for somebody that's actually got business development skills. Why? Because in a small to medium operation, we're having to actually bring somebody on that can actually grow the business, not just actually manage engineering. And the last point that I really want to make around aggressive growth strategies is where I sort of hand over to Agnes and Stephen over here, is really around ensuring that all necessary protections are in place to make sure that whatever strategy that you apply around aggressive business growth, that you're actually you've got the contracts, if you're going into innovation, that you've got those sorts of things sorted out, because we do see that businesses get themselves into trouble because they sort of deviate, they diversify, and then all of a sudden they have these legal implications. And what I really want to do tonight is encourage you to listen to Agnes and Stephen and go, well, what are some of the things that we might want to put in not know that we've sort of got entry level, but sort of tech startups, business startups. And we'll get to that a little bit later. So we've got businesses of different sort of spectrum of maturity in here. What are the different things that you need to be thinking about? So I guess this is over to Agnes and Steve. What might be the considerations to ensure that you protect yourself legally if you're looking at an aggressive growth strategy? And what can you do proactively to ensure that if you go down that aggressive growth path and things do go well, that you're ready for that growth?
All right, aggressive growth strategy. One of the focuses might be on how you're going to resource your team members, because although again, some people are downsizing, that sometimes there's always people coming into the market that think, great, now we're going to grow because we can acquire a whole lot of people that we need now, we've got all the skills and know where to go. We could use this, maybe we can now grow our business into that area we wanted to, but we haven't. Let's get it at the bottom end of the market. So there's a lot of options here. I'll bring them all up because they're all different types and ways. Oh, okay. Oh. I'll just do that. My button. You touched yes.
I don't know, but now I've lost the screen here. That's the one we wanted, isn't it? Technology glitches.
Yeah, that one there. So.
Yep.
Right, so there's these different areas. Stephen will deal more with the commercial aspects of some of the types of arrangements, but just some of the little tips and hints that I've learned with my clients and as I've been going along is, especially here in Australia with casuals that we have, sometimes people think, well, I don't know if I want to take on all these people, it might be a little bit dangerous, why don't I just enter into a casual relationship, because that means that when I don't have the work anymore, I don't need them, very easy, very simple. But then you've got what's called long-term casuals, which are also mentioned in Fair Work Act. So when I came over from New Zealand, I had to get my head around that because casual to casual, for goodness sake, what's this long-term casual business? So trying to get that definition, and I did run a seminar on that very early when I came here in 2011, because you'll find in the mining sector or some of those sectors that people take on casual, they arrange for labour hire organisations to employ them because then they don't have to worry about the employment relationship, send them off where they don't see them at all, then managers up there say, okay, I'm going to put you onto a roster, a fly and fly out, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, every day, they know what they're doing. Is that a casual? Nobody asks the question. They're a casual because we've written it on a piece of paper and called you a casual and it's not a document. That is not going to work from a legal perspective. So unwittingly from a labour hire perspective, there has been a case on that. Heaps of people go up there, they're on fixed term rosters, They are no longer casuals, they're actually permanents. And so suddenly you get issues with holiday pay and all these other terrible things that come back to bite these organisations. Some have gone under because they've hired tens of thousands of workers, the ATOs after them are tragic, it's terrible. So just a word of warning there, stick to the rules with casuals. If you've got casuals, let them know either weekly or monthly or daily, today or this week or this month I've got this for you, then you're limiting that time. After that, let's have a chat. 2-minute conversation, stick to the rules is my little tip for that. Another aggressive growth strategy people are doing these days is outsource overseas. For example, these days you can have people typing up for you in India for something like $2 an hour or something, so why am I paying $25 or $50 an hour? So there's so many different ways that you can grow your business without being stuck in a certain mindset, is what we're looking at here. The other thing to outsourcing is, I had a case recently where there was a business that were bringing in a whole lot of people this way from overseas, so there's all these visa applications and things. Now what the employer didn't realise was, okay, I'll bring you over, you pay your for your trip over, you pay for this and you pay for that. It amounted to $78,000. Then a couple of years later dismissed the worker. Now what the employer didn't realise was there's rules there about bringing people in. The employer has to pay all those costs. So as part of the employee coming to me, we had to look at the immigration thing, and the employer agreed that let's quietly settle this and we'll pay all those back, because they didn't want all the other workers to know that really legally they needed to pay for it. So there's little traps, very easy just to ring up the employer, get that friendly relationship and say, hey, I'm doing this. Yep.
So is it right to ask a question now, or you finished?
Different.
Just around that, is that specific to a particular type of visa they brought them out on? Because we've brought a few people out on visas, and my understanding was actually that it was our responsibility to pay for their return travel costs, not the ones coming out.
Yeah, well, all I'm saying here in my message is whatever type of visa you use, there are rules behind it, and sometimes for small businesses in particular, especially if you're consultants, there's a lot of people here that actually help small business people. Just get them to, small business people are so busy, they don't read all the documents, they don't read all the rules, they just go ahead and do stuff, right? And so it really is important that it doesn't come back to bite them. It's a little bit like a due diligence check on your business in all different areas, just to make sure somebody's got to go through and tidy it up. If you haven't got time, get an external person to do it. But once a year, let's have a look at what we're doing. Have we complied? Because you don't want to wait till you get an issue. That's all. So if you're confident you're following the rules on your particular visa, is that the same question?
Yeah, I was kind of the same questions. I just want to add that on 457 visa, a lot of people coming in. I've heard of the cases where someone told me that they actually came on 4-year visa, left the company after a year, get injured or something. Company sacked them, they've sued them, and they got 4 years of salary. I was in 457. I tried to find where that is, but I think that's not true. I'm not sure if you have any experience.
It sounds a bit bizarre to me. The only way that could possibly work, and again, people say, well, this person got 100 or 200,000, Stephen would give all this commercial as well. Why aren't I getting that? And law is very much what the facts are, and there might be a few different facts. So a person might have been, for some reason, on a fixed term contract for a period of time with no out. The only way is if you cut it short and you're wrong in cutting it short, you have to pay out the balance of the contract. So I have no idea.
But generally, it's only the maximum you get is 6 months if you're under the threshold.
An unfair dismissal claim, that
$130,000. So if you're under that, you're in Fair Work Australia, and the maximum they can get is 6 months. So unless they've got some,
Okay.
if they've got some other contractual arrangement.
Probably.
Can I just ask a question as well, Agnes? In terms of disclosure to your clients, if you're using outsourcing to overseas entities, do you need to, say for example, we're an accounting firm, if we outsource to India, do we then need to notify our clients that their information is being sent overseas for processing, that sort of thing, or? Have you come across that?
Disclosure of information.
Just a
Really
disclosure
good,
to
really
them.
good question. It's really topical at the moment.
Yes.
So-
I mean, I can't imagine they would be too happy, some of them, to know
Yeah.
that that's occurring. But in terms of the actual legalities behind, do we have to basically notify them that we will be using outsourcing resources?
Yeah, so changes with the privacy legislation, yes, you would definitely
We
have
do?
to, because you're basically revealing confidential information to an outside source. So it goes so far as if you outsourced say you send a newsletter to your clients and you use a external company to send out that newsletter and you provided their contact details for that to occur, you're then also caught by the changes to the privacy legislation and that privacy policy. That policy needs to address certain things. If it doesn't, it's a significant breach of the legislation.
Can I just jump in on that then? So what would be like if I use a subcontractor? So I'll use this example. So I'm going to use a subcontractor to do my graphic design work. Who's based here in Perth. Or I'm going to use a freelancer who's overseas. I'm not going to inform the client whether I've got a subcontractor here or I'm going to freelancer overseas.
Yeah. So it's the privacy stuff around it. So if there's private information about the individuals that is going to an external provider, that's going to trigger the privacy legislation. But if I'm using an external provider to look at our graphic design, if we want to change our logo, no problem. It's an internal in-house thing. We don't have to.
The other thing too, if I might just say, if you're doing something for a client and using an external source to do the work for that client, again, like for the legal industry, there will be certain rules about that where you can't get on fees and all that kind of thing. So again, you've got to look at what industry you're in, exactly what you're doing. If I could just quickly jump on that Privacy Act thing, I just had a look at that issue for last week when we did something from the Health Conference in Kings Park. It's interesting to note that Australia has a Commonwealth legislation on privacy law, which applies to all the public sector and small business that generate more than $3 million. WA itself does not have its own state privacy law, so you're really having your policies and all that is very good. But the key thing is, you can only you have to tell people why you're gathering that information and what you're doing with it is usually what the privacy laws are about. But yeah, WA has kind of got that little gap. I mean, I try to use privacy law a lot when I'm dealing with employment law. In New Zealand, you can get discovery using that way. You say, under the Privacy Act, my client, I want the whole personnel file from you, please. And they have to give it, or you can report it to the Privacy Commissioner and make them pay a fee. Over here, you can't do that.
But probably actually just drill down a bit more. You would be able to get around it by if you have in your engagement process with your clients advise them that you've got a privacy policy and you can access it through our website here.
Yeah.
And in that privacy policy, if you disclose in that some of your information may be provided to external providers that assist us in the production of our services or product, you would then cover off.
Right, and if they've accepted that in their
So as
engagement.
long as we put like a paragraph in our initial engagement letter, then we're covered.
I think it does refer.
I think with that, you go for it.
Is it because Privacy Act, does that cover individuals only or business as well? If you're doing business-to-business transactions, I don't imagine the Privacy Act covers, it still applies business to business as well.
Yep.
And it's
Because they're private information that a corporation can hold.
you can always rely on the common law confidential information as well, okay? A lot of people when they engage staff and then they leave and then they try to remind them or they might breach and tell stuff about what's happening inside. There's a common law provision that when you know that things are confidential, even if your employment relationship comes to an end, it does not give you the right to talk about what's happening in the business. It's a provision that goes on whether you're in there or whether you're not. It doesn't stop the relationship. So you've got the statutory provisions and you've got your common law ones. I think we'll move on because we're getting a bit long on here, but just I guess the idea is to let you see that there's all different ways that you can do this, same as contractors, partnerships and JV, if you're looking at some commercial things to add. Partnerships are interesting Probably don't have time to talk about that tonight, but in terms of employment, you might have two companies going together in partnership to do business, and then the partnership employs staff. This is an example that's happened to me very recently, where there was a workplace fatality, WorkSafe came in, sued both companies, we acted for one company. There's no joint employer doctrine in Australia. So WorkSafe sued our client. Only one of the companies surely can afford, can't have two. So not guilty, and only 3 days before the hearing they pulled out. In our case, now we're arguing costs because it's been a couple of years, an extremely stressful process for our client. So who is the employer? If you're going to go into a partnership relationship, partnerships are nothing. It's not a company. A company is a legal person, a partnership isn't. So again, it's the paperwork, thinking about who's going to employ. But in terms of growth strategies, Stephen, for partnerships or JVs, what kind of maybe little legal things might there be in terms of when you're forming alliances or things or useful things for the joint venture?
So one of the problems that we regularly come across is people have these initial discussions, and the discussions nowadays more often take place by way of exchange of emails or some handwritten scrawls at meetings, and people then start to develop the idea and start to work on the development of that idea. And it may be that it's a startup, it may be that it's two existing companies that are thriving well and they've got some synergies that they want to work together on some project, and they start to develop it, but they never actually properly document it. And we often find that that exchange of emails has some implied agreements in it, and they have started to work on the venture, and by the nature of that email, either there is actually a contract that's formed. I often have people say to me, well, there's no contract because we haven't signed something. But a contract can be formed in any number of ways. So you can form a contract verbally, you can form it by an exchange of emails, you can form it by the handwritten note that you make at a meeting together. So it requires a meeting of minds, and it requires both parties to consent to the arrangement. So what we're often talking to our clients about is, document that initial arrangement, even if it is that it's not formal and you're wanting to explore a venture, get a heads of agreement up. And that heads of agreement will talk about whether or not it's binding, what happens in certain circumstances. We had a matter recently where a couple of companies met and they were looking at a venture in relation to the mining tenement before things went bad, and they documented to some degree the arrangement, but there was a lot of contingencies they hadn't thought about. One party did a lot of initial work, and there were certain rights when it started to extract that they were going to get, but it didn't look at, well, what happens if there's a crash and we don't go advance the project further than this for a considerable period of time. So one of the things you're going to get by speaking to advisors is they may think about several of those aspects that you might not have turned your mind to. The other thing is by documenting and getting a heads of agreement, there's not an argument 6-12 months down the track about, oh no, my email meant that, or my conversation meant this. We've got one at the moment where dispute between a reasonable sized building company and a scaffolding company, and it's about to go to trial, and some of the pleadings, which is what we put before a court saying what each party's story is in that there's a significant portion that says, well, I said this in a conversation, we said that in a conversation. So it's highly undesirable from a legal point of view, because it's the advice to the client is, well, it's going to come down to who the judge believes at the end of the day, because they're both saying a completely different thing was said in the conversation, and the conversation is quite crucial as to what the nature of the agreement was that they formed. Probably just looking a bit then too at startups as well. If you're starting up a new venture, and that could be between two companies or an initial startup, look at confidentiality agreements. If you're going to start to bounce really good ideas off people, make sure before you do so, get them to sign something that prevents them from going out there and using it. If they've got a problem with signing that before you have the conversation, it probably tells you something about where the relationship may go, and the conversation may be better had with someone else. Got an interesting one recently we've worked with a company that has some really important staff that they want to work on retaining, and they've developed an internal system about how they profit share. So I think at the moment a lot of people think, oh, you know, it's such a tough environment there, people aren't going to leave me because there's no great opportunities out there for them to go to. But I think it's quite the contrary. It's just like when they're aggressively, when times are good, good staff get aggressively headhunted on remuneration packages, and they get offered more money and better conditions. But I think at the moment people out there will look at moving for other reasons as well. They'll look at opportunities. They might be also looking at, well, if it might be a good time for me to develop an idea of my own, because there's some niches in the market that are really opening up because people are downsizing. So that staff retention process is still really important. And what this company has done is they've developed a structure where they've got a trust that owns a percentage of the company, and that trust each year wires a certain amount of profit. That trust then has as the beneficiaries of that trust all of the employees of the organisation. They then have certain policies about how they distribute profit out of that to the employees. So they have certain KPIs and certain bonus structures that they have for their staff that determine how each year they distribute that profit. So it allows a system whereby the employees have got a vested interest in the company being profitable, and they've got a benefit from it being profitable. So yeah, there's innovative things like that you still want to be looking at doing to retain staff, and you know, developing from within a shareholder base, and the ability to grow people within your organisation. So maybe they get to a point where you may want to looking at developing them into a director partner of the organisation, and retaining them until you get to that vision.
Right, thanks Stephen. Thanks Agnes. I might just touch on a couple of things before we move to the next slide. I think that Stephen's probably provided a really good segue into the next one, which is around innovation, diversification and new directions, but I might just offer an experience that I've had, particularly with the outsourcing to overseas workers through Upwork. So some of you might have used Upwork or Freelancer or Odesk or Guru or Elance, some of them have merged now. And we had a situation just recently where we were ripped off by a freelancer in India, did a $200 job. All of a sudden got a $2,500 bill because it's directly debited to your credit card. All of a sudden $2,500 went out very quickly, and so I sort of went to task with Upwork and I said something's gone wrong here, and then they started putting the contracts and everything that I've pretty much virtually signed in front of me, saying, well, it's your responsibility to do this and this and this, and I said, hey, that's $2,500, that's a lot of money. And they didn't back down, so I ended up finding the email address for the CEO of Upwork, who's based in San Francisco somehow, and I sent him a direct email and I said, War and Peace. I gave it to him, and all of a sudden one of the staff came back to me and said, look, we're going to reimburse you for the $2,500. But I guess the point is, a lot of people are using overseas freelancers now. A lot of small to medium businesses in particular are using them because it's a very cost-effective way of getting work done. And we had a meeting with a client the other day, and it was quite funny because the CEO said, so where are your freelancers from? What are they doing for you? And I said, what about yours? And so, because that's actually becoming quite a common conversation. But from a legal perspective, as soon as you actually log on, you set up an account, you're basically, you're signing up to all of their terms and conditions, which sometimes are in small print, and they're enormous, and most people just won't read them. So sometimes it's actually important, because I sort of threatened legal action, but I actually knew that I didn't have a leg to stand on, because based on the situation. So it's something that is worth considering. The next point is really around innovation, diversification, and new directions. And what you're going to find from this presentation is that we're going to start sort of covering what is coming up next already in the conversation. Shifting the business model, I think that a lot of businesses at the moment would be reflecting a little bit on what they're actually offering the market, and the structure of the organisation, whether that's actually relevant in the current marketplace. And so if you're not looking at your business model at the moment, it's something that you probably should be doing, and you should probably be doing it fairly frequently, because if you play the avoidance card and go, hey, we're really good at what we do, we're really passionate about it, and in the end, it'll pick up again, then, you might end up, having a pretty horrible outcome from that. Two of the other points that are really quite linked are around research and development and creation or adoption of technology. It was interesting again, when I was putting this presentation together, what I wanted to try and do was, build a couple of slides that had some concepts, and then go back and do some reading and just go, what are people saying about it. And what was great is I was reading some stuff from the Harvard Business Review and Boston Consulting Group, and a lot of what they were saying is there's enough history and enough research that shows that businesses during a downturn that invest in research and development and technology will ride that downturn out really, really well, and when there's an upswing, they'll just fly through it. And so, what are you doing in the way of research and development at the moment? What opportunities are you taking there? And the other thing around technology, and we're in a really interesting space at the moment because we've got a client where we're sort of building a technology piece for them, and in effect, they're quite happy to do investment in it, and we're building it with them, so we'll own it. We've also just had another situation where a mining company has come to us, and they're in a pretty tough place right now, and they've said, we've had this idea over time to build this particular app, and we'd love to build it, but right now we don't have the money to spend on somebody like you to help us build it. But hey, we'll invest in the technology if you do the building for free, and then we can sign a contract and you can own it and sell it to your clients forever. And which is great. It's such an exciting time for us because the last time I got a quote to build pretty much what they want, it was at least $100,000 to $150,000 just to have the preliminary phase of it built. Now we've actually got an organisation that's willing to put in the full investment to get it done, and will potentially own that technology. So think a little bit outside the square. If you're thinking about building some technology, these days you can actually have the technology built so much cheaper than what you could have maybe 5 years ago. But again, it comes back to where you find the people that can actually build it too. Because where are they going to be? They're probably going to be freelancers from overseas. Maybe they're going to be in India or Turkey, or maybe they're going to be in Eastern Europe, because there's some really good software developers in Eastern Europe. So how do you make sure that when you actually build this technology, that the people in Eastern Europe aren't actually going to steal it, sell it to somebody else, and then they're going to sell it on as well? So there's a lot of complexities in this that you're going to be thinking about. The last point there, it's come up a little bit already, but having the mindset of a startup business, and I think a lot of existing businesses forget that they started at some point in time in the future, and they had to maybe raise some funds. Maybe they saved some money, or maybe they raised capital through so many other different ways, because you can raise capital in different through different channels. But if you're in a situation at the moment where you're going, we can't see the revenue increasing that quickly, how might we be able to find other capital out there, and how do you think creatively like a startup? Because you're seeing, particularly in that Generation Y category at the moment, there are a lot of really young people starting up businesses, and you've got to ask the question sometimes, where the bloody hell did they get all their money from? Because so they're finding investors somehow. So if you're a bit savvy in business and you've been around for a while, surely you should know other channels to find that money as well. I guess in terms of some of those points there, what are some of the things that we need to be thinking about from a due diligence perspective? IP, trademarks, when it comes to technology, R&D.
All right. Due diligence. That's how's that
So to conduct a proper due diligence, and then particularly if you're sort of largely you're buying into an organisation, so there should be several people that you'll involve in that process, and it depends what you're buying into, who those people should be. There should be generally a legal advisor, there should be an accounting advisor, but there also should be, possibly, depending on the nature of your personal expertise, people that have got expertise in the nature of the business that you're purchasing. So if you're purchasing a business, say, that produces machinery for the mining industry, and if you're a great salesperson in the industry but you don't know particulars about it, we were involved with a purchase of a business where the person purchased all of this stock, and a significant portion of the stock, despite their knowledge, was just completely outdated stock, and they paid good money for it, but didn't realise it until it was a massive purchase. They didn't realise that probably about 10% of the stock that they purchased was completely outdated, and they just ended up having to pay for it to get shipped out to a waste facility. So having someone with some expertise in that area. So due diligence conducting a thorough examination of what you're getting into. So the accountant should then be crunching the numbers and be telling you a lot of details behind those numbers. We often have people that purchase a business say, well, it's turning over that much profit. So when I walk in 2 weeks' time, it's going to turn over that much profit as well. And often the figures are only telling part of the picture. So there's someone sending that is that not actually drawing money from it. There's certain profit share arrangements that aren't actually properly disclosed in the books. We're dealing with one at the moment where the person purchased a restaurant, expected it was going to be making $29,000 a month. It's actually now only making $18,000 a month, and it will go under within 12 months if they don't find some change, and they can't understand how it's happened. I said, well, did you do a due diligence? They said, well, the accountant looked at it, but what they probably didn't do is they didn't look at, well, the fact was the actual people who were running the business actually drawing a wage out of it. They're all drawing a wage. There's 3 of them, and all of a sudden that's a significant portion of the turnover. On the legal aspect of it, you want to, if you've got supply arrangements, if you've got people out there conducting distributorship for you, you want to make sure all of those contractual arrangements are in place. If you're buying property where it's important for your location, have they got a significant portion of the lease still to run? So all of those contracts that form the necessity of the business operating successfully on a day-to-day basis, you want for a lawyer to check through all of that process for you to make sure that is all in place. So now part of that innovation and growth and purchase, but I think also part of it is you might want to diversify what you do from internally. And if you're starting to do new things with your business, you might want to make sure that your terms of trade that you're operating under cover the new type of business that you're operating in. And often too, when you stretch yourself into a new area of business, you acquire some new clients. Have you done proper credit checks on these new clients? You know, we're in a pretty volatile economic climate at the moment. We're seeing a lot of people come through the door that are affected by that. Businesses going under personal insolvency. So if you're going to be extending credit, make sure that you've got your credit processes in place correctly, be it new line that you're doing. So be fully aware of what the PPSA is. I'm still seeing people regularly that don't know about the Personal Property Security Act and how it operates for their business. Put your hand up if you are familiar with the PPSA and what it operates. Good. Okay. For the rest of you, I'm going to do this in 3 minutes, but it deserves a whole hour. So the PPSA is an act called the Personal Property Security Act. It's an act which came into force about 2 years ago in Australia. It now governs how every bit of assets, pretty much except for real estate, is dealt with in the country. So there used to be 42 different registries in Australia that dealt with taking security over an asset. That's now 1. So they used to have 1 for motor vehicles, used to have 1 for crops, used to have 1 for boats. That's all been moulded into 1. But one of the most significant things that this Act does is it says, if I've got a piece of equipment sitting on my neighbour's site, and my neighbour's a company, and that company goes into liquidation tomorrow, and I've just parked it there because we've got an arrangement that I'm allowed to do that, I then go to pick it up tomorrow because they've gone under and I want to get it back. No go. The liquidator now owns that asset. I've got no rights to get it back. Even though it's mine, that company had no rights whatsoever to it. They just let me park it there. They let me store it there. I cannot get it. It's gone. So we've got a client at the moment who's got a $500,000 truck that his brother was using in his transport business, and his brother's transport business went under. The ANZ appointed receivers to the company, and they've lost it because his brother didn't register on it. If he had done a simple registration process that takes all of about 3 minutes, that registered on this registry, which is done online, that said he puts in the VIN number for that vehicle and showed that he was the owner of that vehicle, he would be able to get it back, and the ANZ would be able to have their receiver go and sell it. But he's lost a $500,000 truck because he let his brother use it for a couple of days, and his brother's business went under while it was sitting on his brother's stock. It's pretty scary, but there's lots of benefits in and around it as well. But just if you've got equipment that you are leaving at other people's places, or if you're selling things on consignment, or if you have retention of title in your terms of trade, they mean nothing anymore unless you go and register on this registry. So just if you are diversifying and you're going into new areas, it probably does open up some new things that you need to consider, and just a good idea to have that conversation. A conversation with a lawyer is, I understand, often not cheap, but the consequences in the long term are usually a lot more expensive if things go wrong.
All right.
So, Seb, that's a very quick question about SA. One thing I haven't looked at for a client before, does it interact with personal bankruptcy law at all, or is it really only if it's required? Say, I'm a company and I've given an employee a company car and it's parked in their garage overnight and they declare bankruptcy.
No.
No? Okay.
No. So personal bankruptcy, completely different scenario.
Okay, yes, just want to make sure.
Just quickly with due diligence, I've had a look at it from a health and safety perspective. Every business that has employers or workers is responsible, obviously, to keep them safe and make sure they don't get harm. So it doesn't matter what industry or organization. WA has an old 1984 Act that hasn't got modern health and safety legislation. It will, and there is a green bill out right now. So in terms of due diligence, there's a positive duty under that Act for officers who usually key decision makers to discharge a whole lot of duties. The Act doesn't define what due diligence means, but what it does do is say as part of due diligence you have to do A, B, C, D, so there's been a bit of a shift in that meaning for the health and safety legislation. It does require technical, situational, and strategic knowledge, which Steve already talked about. But also, normally when you're doing due diligence for companies, you're focusing on shareholder rights. When you're looking at health and safety, you're actually focus is shifted to protecting the employees. Just quickly now, IP protection. Once again, if you're going through strategic growth, somebody you're going to come into a whole copyright issue, maybe trademark issues, other intellectual property things, and you want to protect scores. Again, looking from a workplace law perspective, copyright, some of the issues that you might want to look at there is executive management team or people in IT that might develop. They often say, I'm not doing this at work, I'm doing it at home. Either work it's kind of, you've got the idea from work that, oh, it's not working quite well, I'm going to develop some time to So then suddenly the workplace, the school, the place is saying, no, that's your job, you designed it. No, I didn't, it wasn't in the course of my employment, which is illegal. So you have this argument back and forth. Who's going to get it? Very simple, make it really clear. Copyright. You can also make it clear in the employment agreements or other commercial arrangements.
Just one quick one on IP. If you are developing IP, the advice that you should have from a legal asset protection point of view is it should be developed in a different organisation than your trading organisation. So you don't want your IP to be owned by the company that you're trading through. Because the reason is if the company you're trading into goes under for whatever reason, you still retain ownership of your IP, and your IP has probably got an intrinsic ongoing value, so you don't want to sacrifice that. It does create certain problems if you're looking to get R&D development grants and to get certain tax benefits that are available for developing technology. You might not get as good a benefit by holding it in an external company than your trading entity. So you need to go and get some expert accounting advice in around that. But from the asset protection point of view, you don't want your IP to be owned by the company that you're trading through, because if your trading company has problems, you still retain the IP. You then go and set up another company the next day and you just license it across to your trading company. So a very simple license agreement that the trading company can use the IP, but it's got no ongoing rights and ownership of it. If your trading company, it's only you just go set up another company day, and your IP can continue to be used.
Some people use those kind of arrangements too when they're staff. terms of just moving down for excess staff, for example, because sometimes when you're strategically growing or later, something that we'll talk about that later, or downsize, and you've either got too many staff, or you might decide, you know, we've got this bus here, we've filled it with people, but we actually forgot about what the destination was, and actually half the people on the bus don't want to go there, so really need to get rid of them, or we've got too many for whatever reason. So dealing a lot with executive staff, because they're the ones that have the biggest contracts involved, the ones that are more expensive. Sometimes, you know, people just totally blanket so they're not covered under a reward. The one clause thing about restraint of trade. Restraints of trade are actually contrary to company policy. So the starting point is they are. So the only way you're going to make a restraint of trade is if it's reasonable. What's reasonable? There's no benchmark on that. You have to have a look at your organisation to determine what's reasonable. So there's been a case where we said, okay, well if that part's not reasonable, then we're going to have this. If that part's not reasonable, we're going to have that. So you might see this clause that's staggered with about 5 different things, trying to envelop it all in a clever legal drafting tool. I think you're going to be maybe a little bit more practical than that. One of the things that I advise clients on is if you've paid valuable consideration for your restraint of trade, you've got someone coming into your organisation that might be very skilled in expertise in an area that you don't. If they walk, they might take away half your staff with you, set up a competition and so on. Pay the valuable consideration. So if you wanted to pay them $200,000 to work for you, why don't you offer them $170,000 salary plus a restraint of trade? I will pay you $30,000 for that restraint of trade. So you've actually got the same result, but you've broken it down so that if they challenge the restraint of trade, the question would be, is it reasonable? Did you get paid in consideration for it? So there's all these different things. Other thing also is garden leave. Now that doesn't mean go home and work in the garden. Like people say, what's this garden leave or garden leave if they're talking about it. Sometimes again when you've got a more senior level person and you they might want to leave it again staff, clients or whatever you do. You have to have it in their contract. You have to think about it, but you can have a clause saying that we make we've got the right to garden leave, which means go home, you'll pay. I've had a situation once with a beekeeping organisation in New Zealand, and the guy, while he was still employed, was setting up a competition, grabbing all the contracts and so forth. We put him on garden leave, which meant that in law, because they just wanted to fire him, don't do that. Put him on garden leave because he's still an employee. While you're an employee, you have a duty of fidelity to your employer. You are not allowed to act in competition with your employer while you're an employer. So it was much strategically better to be at home for 3 months getting paid, while the organisation knew that he was sitting there and what he was going to do. They've got a 3-month window to market hard, make sure they don't lose that share of this person quietly behind the garden. And watch TV, getting paid. Now, if they want to breach those rules, which the guy did, got there already anyway when you go to court, it's still expensive, you wouldn't want to court anyway, but hey, this is even employee, he breached his duty of fidelity. There's other ones there, we're probably running out of time.
Just a quick question on duty of fidelity. Does it extend across different geographies? What I mean by that is if you're employed in Australia and were to compete in a different geography altogether, we're still going back to duty of fidelity.
It depends on the organisation. So if your organisation has, let's say Australia has an international base, you go, say you've got business in India and you go and work for a competitor in India, then probably. But if you're working in an Australian organisation that has no interest or potential interest in outreaching competition, then yeah, you could, unless your employment agreement may specify that you are working for a sole employer. So if you contractually enter into an arrangement that you cannot work for another organisation, but the general duty.
It's got to be reasonable though, because no court will prevent someone from working. So if someone says you can't work in the whole of Australia, I don't believe. But if you have a restricted territorial area, so you can move to another state and you can work somewhere.
Yeah, I have a question about that. So I was told, because I had these issues with my ex-employer, that if you can't provide for a family, you can go and work and no court will do any harm to you, because you're getting central help and you just want to work for some IT company, that I can go and work, that even if I signed a contract when I was leaving, that I won't work competition for years and stuff like that. Is that correct? Or
It depends. It's
Yeah,
really.
it does
We've got one at the
There's
moment.
there's no
I sold
fact.
sold his business 20 months ago in Geraldton for $500,000, and in the contract I was attached to a deed of restraint of trade, and in that it had what Agnes was talking about, what we call the waterfall clause. So it said that you were restrained for 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, 6 months, 3 months. And the reason why that is, the court may consider that 12 months is a reasonable restraint, and therefore you can hang your hat on the 12 months. But if you had just gone in saying you're restrained for 3 years, the court said that's unreasonable, you end up with no restraint. So that's why the waterfall clause. The clause then said Australia, then it said about 5 different states, then 3 different states. It ended up with Western Australia as the last restriction. He was then employed by the company for 18 months, and that was part of the arrangement. After 18 months, they said, see you later, your employment's over. 1 month later, he went and set up a business in competition. But he didn't do it in Geraldton, where he'd operated this business for 20 years. He did it at Perth, and he didn't do it with any customers of theirs. And he'd been in this area for 20 years. So the question then comes down to, well, did they pay him $500,000? Was that benefit enough for him not to work for a period of time in competition with them? Or did him then continue to work for them for 18 months? Did that allow them enough time to take his client base? So it's not a black or white story.
so that
Change all the time. Yeah,
Oh,
ultimately our advice would be to him is their bottom area for restraint is Western Australia, and we're going to say to him that's not reasonable. To restrain him completely in Western Australia from working in that, because it's quite a niche field, and he's got all his 20 years of work experience here, to completely restrain him in Western Australia is unreasonable. And so our advice is going to be, no, you should argue it because it's okay. But if they had said, you can't do business in Geraldton for 100k around Geraldton for a period of 12 months, 18 months, I might say that was a reasonable restraint.
that's what I had when I bought the business. I had Perth an area 50k. So if this guy wants to go and open a business somewhere else, probably.
It'll depend on the nature of the business, what he did, what you remunerated, what you.
But that's the court. That's to go to court, and then court decides that.
What we do as lawyers is we look at what a court's done, and we then advise our clients based upon the law in that regard is changing things. It's not. So that's how we advise people based on what. So you don't want to go to court. 95% of matters that actually start in a court case settle before they get to trial. So most matters don't go to court.
Thanks.
For those who know me well, they know that I can talk a fair bit.
No,
A bit out of sorts. Okay, so I think that the next slide here that we've got, we've actually covered quite a lot of the responses to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a couple of important key concepts here. This is around people and structure. So in terms of, I guess, growing and looking at strategy, particularly in the current market, there's a number of things that you can do. One is reflecting on your business structure. And I guess part of some of the work that we do around the facilitation of strategy is also looking at the current workforce requirements for the future and ensuring that it's the right workforce, and I mean sometimes it's not. So I guess you just have to accept that that's the case. And one of the areas is around the market engagement model, and this is something that I've been exposed to ever since I started in consulting. I came into a consultancy where they had a rainmaker model. So if you're familiar around sort of sales type models, the rainmaker model in that business was there was a couple of very senior people that brought in all the work, and there was a whole bunch of consultants that would effectively project manage it out to subcontractors. Acquired by a big company, the company comes in, says, no, seller doers. Everybody's a seller doer now, which means that everybody has to go out and sell, and then they have to project manage, and they probably have to do the work too. Right? And there was no change management process that was put in place. And so immediately it starts to lead to burnout because people don't know how to do it. They haven't been trained to do sales. In fact, they haven't been trained to do project management either. And so things can go pear-shaped pretty quickly. It did. So I came into a business where everybody was resigning at the same time. That business went through a couple of major changes like that. They just didn't take into consideration the existing culture of the business and the existing structure of the business. And we know from some fairly famous cases in recent times that where very, very hardcore sales models have been applied into businesses, it's led to suicides, it's led to other cases where you've got to be very careful because if the culture of the business historically hasn't lended itself to people going out and doing the sales and then you're forcing it on them, that might not necessarily work very well with them. So understanding the current culture of your business and also the willingness for people to actually engage in a different type of sales model is really, really critical. And we talk a lot about firm-wide business development culture where everybody plays a role in sales, but it might not necessarily be the same role. That's a separate conversation. The next part there is around the service delivery model, and that is, we've discussed that a little bit tonight, around how you're actually delivering service to your clients. What is the service, or what is the product, how you're delivering it, and who is delivering it. And I mean, it's one of the things that a lot of businesses are looking at the moment, because if you can find efficiencies in the way that you're delivering a service to your clients, or if you can use lesser paid staff to do higher paid work, or if you can make more profit out of a job, then you'll go down that path. But again, you need to be thinking a little bit about what you're actually selling to people, what their expectations are, and whether you're actually meeting their expectations. People decisions, I'll defer in a second to Agnes on this one. But redundancies is rife across Australia at the moment. It's rife across the world. People are being made redundant left, right, and centre, and it's not just in large businesses; it's in small businesses too. I think that we have a duty of care to make sure that we set people up for success and ensure that the business is sustainable long term. However, it doesn't necessarily always play out like that, and the business ends up sometimes suffering, and we have to make decisions that people are going to leave the business. But there's a way of doing that to give some people some dignity as well. And what we're seeing around the place at the moment, and we've seen some first-hand examples recently where it's pretty horrific. And I actually had a conversation with somebody on the phone yesterday, and it was a really sad conversation because her whole team had been wiped out. And she said, she was actually telling me the story as the survivor. She said, I didn't feel like I should be working here anymore, and I felt bad to speak to them because they're no longer here. And it was heartbreaking that my whole team basically got made redundant. So there's different ways that you can go about that if you have to go down the path, but it's certainly important to make sure that you do it the right way. And I guess that leads to that last point there, which is the management of fallout. And when you actually go down the path of making decisions around structure and people, inevitably there is going to be fallout, and you can do run the best possible process to move people outside of the business and still end up with some fallout. Just a couple of questions that have come up in previous seminars that we've run and things that have been asked of us. Please, please, please do not just keep cutting people's hours until they get so pissed off that they leave. That's not a very nice thing to do, right? But we've been asked if that's appropriate. It's not appropriate. It's not a nice thing to do. If you're going to cut people off, do it the right way. Don't try and performance manage people and do redundancy thing at the same time. They're two separate things. If people are underperforming, deal with it in a performance management way. If it's a redundancy because it's a restructure, do a restructure and redundancy separately. They're not the same thing, and we see people trying to play with them. Sometimes it's because making people redundant is a sweetener because you pay people out rather than actually getting rid of a significant underperformer. The other thing that came up just recently, we had a couple of people in the business that have been there for 30 to 40 years, underperforming for a period of time, extremely poor attitude, very, very poor behaviour. The question was, should we be making restructuring and making them redundant or performance managing them out of the business? And I said, there's another consideration, and that is, for an organisation of the size of yours, what does that actually say to the rest of the business when you've had people that have been in the business for 3 to 4 decades And when the market turns and things aren't going very well and they aren't responding very well to it, you turf them out. So really, and I can't tell you what the best decision is in that context, because that's a really complicated one. But being able to just remove these people out of the business, that is not necessarily going to be the easiest way to go, and it's potentially going to have some aftershocks.